Decluttering is hard, but it can be a lot harder if you're making silly mistakes along the way. And believe me, I've done a lot of that. I've been decluttering for several years and I have made all the mistakes. But those mistakes have slowed me down and made it harder to be successful. Now, with more experience and I think a bit more success at decluttering, I want to share with you what I believe are the 8 most common mistakes people make in decluttering. And the last one, I think, is the most frequent mistake people make, and it really sets them back. So stick around for it if you're interested. The goal of this video is to make decluttering less difficult and more fun. A first common mistake that I hear about a lot, that I have made many times, is convincing yourself you're going to use something that you forgot you even had. We've all been there when we're going through a basement or a back cupboard, we come across an item that is actually really useful, we might have even used it a lot in the past, but we forgot we had it. And then, at least for me, my brain starts to think of all the different ways I could use this belonging. I start to envision a better future with this belonging. I think about all the possibilities. And then I even get excited, it makes me happy at the thought of being able to use this belonging. But the reality is, if you literally forgot you had it, you're probably not going to use it again. There might be a rare exception to this, and of course there's an exception to practically every rule, but in general, if you literally forgot you had it, that is a sign to let it go. A second mistake I've often made is keeping things out of a fear of wastefulness. The reality is, if you have something and you don't really use it and you're not really going to use it in the future, keeping it around is not reducing how wasteful you were for having gotten it in the first place. This is closely related to that last one I mentioned, because sometimes when we haven't used something or we forgot we had it, we feel a sense of guilt that we're not being environmentally friendly, or we're not being conscientious, or we wasted that money. So we fall into the sunk cost fallacy where we keep something, we almost invest more of our time and energy into that belonging, because realistically storing something still takes up space and therefore sort of money and time and energy, because you'll have to deal with that object again in the future. But basically we tell ourselves we're being wasteful, therefore if we keep it, we're being less wasteful, when unless you're really gonna use it, the wasteful act has already happened. And I think if you can flip it and instead see it as an empowering moment, a moment of improving yourself to let something go that you feel was wasteful, then by seeing it differently, you can actually feel better after the declutter and not feel so bad about being wasteful. Yes, I was wasteful, but I can learn from it and hopefully be better in the future. A third mistake I've often made is to be too ambitious on a particular day or week as far as my plan for what I'm going to declutter. Basically, there are times where I have some big plan, like I'm going to declutter this entire house this week, or I'm going to declutter the entire garage or the entire basement in one day. And that can end up being a lot. It might end up taking longer than I think, because maybe as I declutter, I'm uncovering objects that are heavy to move or difficult to deal with, or it's just taking longer than I thought. And then I feel like a failure, then I overdo it and I'm super tired afterward, and I start to associate these negative feelings and experiences of fatigue, of overwhelm, of anxiety with decluttering. And that can be a huge mistake, because then if your brain always associates a bad time with decluttering, it's that much harder to get yourself to go do it. I know it may be true for some people, they're able to do one declutter and then never have a problem again. For me, I think sometimes I just have to regularly do declutters, and I constantly have to be having that mindset, even to take on little mini declutters randomly throughout the day when I didn't even plan them. I would rather have that mindset of being open to a little declutter here or there, where I can make a little dent in the stuff I have, than to just feel like it has to be all or nothing. Because then again, when it's all, often it's very unpleasant, very difficult, and you're just going to do the all way less frequently. A fourth common mistake I've heard from people is assuming that you will be clear on what sparks joy right away. I still have trouble with this. I don't know, maybe I'm doing it wrong, but the whole idea that Marie Kondo came up with, that eventually you hone this skill in being really good at determining what sparks joy, so what you should keep versus what doesn't. That whole idea, I just can't quite buy into it, because There are times where I come across an object and I'm just not sure whether to keep it or not. And so sometimes for me, it's like I'm keeping something because it just brings me a lot of happiness. Other times I'm keeping things because it's practical. And for me, the feeling isn't always the same. But I don't think that means that I'm a total failure at decluttering. I still declutter, I still make big strides in my minimalism journey. So I think it's okay that I'm not always clear, that I'm a little bit up in the air. Sometimes decluttering gets harder than others, and that's normal, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you're failing. And I guess I just want to normalize that, because if you're a little bit confused, that's okay. Sometimes I'm still confused too. That being said, I do think that as you declutter, it does get easier to let things go. It's almost like an exposure in exposure therapy. You get more used to the emotional experience of letting objects go, and then it does become a bit easier, and you do get a little faster at recognizing, you know what, I don't really need this, or honestly, I don't get that excited by this thing that's supposed to make me happy. I can let it go. Those decisions become easier over time, but still to this day, occasionally, I get caught up in a decision and it's tough, and that's okay. A fifth one that's honestly one of the biggest ones for people, I think, is being in the wrong mindset, mood, or physical state when you start to declutter. If you are not primed to be ready to let things go, if you are hungry, if you are super tired, if you are super stressed or sad, it's hard to have a good, successful declutter. And again, you'll start to associate this negative feeling with the decluttering. You want to be set up where decluttering ends up being fun for you. Maybe you put on a fun podcast or some fun music in the background. Maybe you've just eaten, so you're feeling energized. You're well rested. Maybe you're planning to do something fun after, so you're in a good mood. I just think it's so important to be in the right physical and mental space for the declutter, because otherwise it is just miserable. Because honestly, decluttering can be hard, but it also can be almost kind of fun, especially if you do it with somebody or you add some kind of entertaining element to it. I just think it can be a lot better than it has to be if you're just going into it with a miserable mindset. What I always do before a declutter is to take the time to think through, why am I doing this declutter in the big picture sense? What do I want my life to look like? How would it feel if this drawer or if this closet or whatever it is were in a better place? How would that make me feel? And when I really even close my eyes and envision it and take the time to let that feeling sink in, and I remember why I'm decluttering, then I can go into the declutter and ultimately be more successful. And when you make each decision easier, it makes the whole thing way better. Because to me, what's hard about decluttering is those individual decisions and feeling guilt or shame or overwhelm. But if you're able to cut down on the decision time, make decisions more quickly, and not put so much meaning into each one, it can just go by so much faster, and it's way more fun. Another mistake is not having a plan for what to do with the objects when you've decided you want to declutter them. Too often, I've had like a box or a bin or whatever of stuff just sitting around for months that I intend to bring to a donation center, but I never really do. I think it's helpful to have a very specific plan about when you're going to go get rid of the belongings, how you're going to do it. Maybe you even have to involve somebody else in the process if it's something that's heavy and you need help lifting. But just have a plan and factor in that time that it will take to eliminate the object from your space as well, because that's part of it. And sometimes, at least I have historically forgotten that. A seventh decluttering mistake is attaching strong emotions or sentimental value to belongings. Now, I want to have some compassion here. We all have a couple of items, maybe from our families that have been passed down, or maybe from a big day in our lives like our wedding day or our graduation day. You know, there might be belongings that mean something to you. And I don't want to totally poo-poo that. Like, it's understandable, it's human. But I do think that, at least for me historically, because I have this sticky brain, I have attached entire relationships to objects mentally in my brain where I'm like, this belonging represents my relationship with this person. Or I just feel a lot of emotion when I see something and it reminds me of some memory, and then I feel like I should keep it just because it was a nice moment to revisit the memory. But ultimately, I have to remind myself these are just belongings. The objects do not have little brains of their own. They're not running around telling that person what you did with them. They're also just symbols or representations of what's lying underneath, which is your relationship with that person or those memories or that emotion. But those things can still exist without keeping the object. And so sometimes I need to remember when I'm decluttering that I'm starting to attach too much meaning and emotion to belongings that just doesn't need to be there. It's okay to sometimes let go of a few memories for the sake of a happier, better future. I'm not really keeping the object even out of those initial emotions anymore. I'm keeping the object out of guilt. And if that's the case, that's not a good reason to keep something. And so I almost want to give you permission. This is me giving you permission, even though I probably don't have the authority to do this. But I want to give you permission to let go of belongings that you're only keeping out of guilt because you associate those objects with a memory, relationship, or emotions. If you're keeping it out of guilt, let it go. The eighth mistake that I have made many times, and that I believe is the biggest thing that holds people back from living a more streamlined, simplified life, is to continue to collect or to buy after you've decluttered. It's the whole society of consumption world we live in, where it's so easy to order things online, where you're constantly being bombarded with ads for some new doodad or some new thing that could make life easier. It is so hard to stop the collecting of things. And I think part of why it's hard is because realistically, we do have to collect things in order to survive. We need to shop for groceries. We need to have clothes. And quite often, our objects also communicate something about ourselves to other people through our style, through what we have in our homes. It's a form of communication and connection. And also it's part of connection. We give each other gifts and therefore we keep things because we feel like we should if it was a gift. The problem is if you're decluttering, but you're just replacing that stuff, you will be intensely decluttering forever. Like I said before, I do think decluttering isn't usually something you just do once and never have to do again. But I do think that over time, it should get a little easier. You shouldn't have to do as intense of declutters years down the road because hopefully you're getting a little better at discerning what to keep and what to collect and what to buy. I'm still on that journey, honestly, because it is easy to think that you need more, especially I gotta say now that I have a baby and I'm constantly being told this idea that like, if you're a good mom, you should have this little thing that makes life easier for your baby or whatever. It is so easy to convince myself that I need to get something. I think sometimes when we ask ourselves the tough questions about why am I buying this? What is it really for? Will I really use it realistically? Will I even remember I had it in 5 years? Those types of questions help me slow down the consumption. And ultimately, that's a good thing too, because it saves me money and it gets my headspace in the right place. So I'm not perfect at it, but I do think that recognizing that the collecting of things is an aspect actually of decluttering. It's not its own thing. It's a really important part of decluttering and the minimalism journey. Once you get that through your head, it becomes easier to say no to things, to not buy things, and therefore to keep your space a little bit tidier. And I do want to acknowledge if you're the person in the home whose job it is to curate and collect, like if you're the one that does the grocery shopping, you get the cleaning supplies, you get the toilet paper, you get the toys for the kids or whatever it is, that is a job and that does take effort and work because you're actually discerning what is necessary or not, what is helpful or not, even if it's not necessary. Yeah, occasionally I want to buy a toy for my kid, you know? That is work. That is labor that's being done in the home. And I think sometimes it's easy to blame the person whose job it is in the home to do a lot of that stuff as being an over collector, which is why I think lots of times there's a stereotype that women tend to be the collectors, but really it's because quite often women take on that labor in the home. I want to normalize sometimes if you are the quote collector in the family, it's part of your role and it's actually a part of the labor or work that you do. And so I don't want to make you feel bad about that. And I don't want to feel bad about that because I do a lot of that in my own family. But that being said, I still think there's a way to do it that allows you to open up your life more rather than making your life more difficult. And that's what this is about, is just when you're in doubt, maybe making the decision not to get something or to wait to get it to see if you really need it. Anyway, I'd love to hear from any of you if you have thoughts on what are the biggest decluttering mistakes you've made. because I'm still trying to learn about how to make the whole process easier and better. If you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button. It's a great way to support the channel. Also hit the subscribe button below if you want to see more videos like this, videos on simple living, minimalism, decluttering, and also building confidence or building an empowering mindset. Those are all things I talk about here. Anyway, thank you so much for spending this little bit of time with me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.